Council of Government Transportation Advisory Committee. We have a quorum, and let's go ahead and do introductions. Jennifer Irvin, El Paso County.
Brian Patulli, City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit.
Darren Horsemeyer, Schlieber Air Force Base.
Mike Kozak, Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Base.
Rick Orphan, Fort Carson.
Robert Dasfate, Town of Palm Lake.
Craig Casper, PPACG.
Wendy Pettit, CDOT Region 2.
Aaron Busto, Federal Highway Administration.
Dan Munn, City of Woodland Park.
Kevin Reyes, PPACG.
Alrighty.
I think we should make the audience introduce themselves.
Yes.
Excellent. All right.
Alrighty. Next item is the agenda approval. You all have that in front of you. Are there any revisions or changes needed for the agenda today?
Move to approve.
Thank you. A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Any, item number 3, public comments. This is any public comments for any item that is not currently on the agenda. Wendy.
I have a mistake I need to bring to the light. At the end of the fiscal year, we had funding, as you all know, that was de-budgeted out of projects so that it could be rolled forward into the current fiscal year for re-budgeting and obligation and so forth. Well, in our process, there was a large chunk of CMAQ money that wound up back in the pool, and I contacted Denver, I contacted my business office, and I asked this question of these folks several times, and I did not get an answer. So in the past, when we didn't get an answer, somebody to stand up and say, this is my money, we have reallocated that money. That money actually belonged to the Falcon Park and Ride. So I found this out yesterday afternoon when I got a phone call from El Paso County. One of the engineers called and told me that they couldn't get the addendum to the contract done because we had an accounting problem. So they were going back looking for what year's money were allocated to the project and so forth and so on. So I pulled up the current report. I pulled up the report from 2010. I pulled up the reports, all that I needed to look to see. And yes, indeed, El Paso County is correct. We lost $1.3 million of federal money in that project at the end of the year by the procrastination of a business person in my region by not getting on top of the process to figure out why things didn't balance. So, with that being said, the money is still available to make the project whole. I just have some homework to do on a couple of things, and then I'm going to figure out how, with the aid of the folks out of Denver that created this problem, by not listening to common sense and doing as they were asked by the region, so these kind of mistakes didn't happen. I need to have some flexibility now to get at the last year of the money I need so that El Paso County can have it. So, with that being said, I'm going to have to bring back an administrative amendment to add that money back into that project. So as soon as I have it all worked out, I will be sending that to Craig and to Kevin so that we can get it put back in the project.
I want to thank you for taking the time to work with Alyssa and I to get that straightened out. It was, I know, a lot of work on your part.
It really wasn't that big of a deal. I just finished a major process with Kevin that morning, so I had most of that stuff at hand. So the biggest problem I have is the fact that you can't take something and stick it in the drawer just because it's inconvenient, and that's my problem with it. So with that being said, I will make sure that at least that process is at least brought to the management's purview so that they know that when those kind of things happen, we can't just let it go, and that the answers have to be given, and that somebody has to be accountable for that money when it starts coming out of those projects. I can't tell you that it's not going to happen again, because I think that as time goes on, if you have something that doesn't work exactly the way it needs to, then this process happens again, and we have something that has to be rolled forward. And if it gets taken out of that project, we, as CDOT, have to be the steward of that process. And Wendy is not going to be sitting in that chair forever to be their Hail Mary to figure out how to fix it for them. So they have to be more responsible on how to figure out how to do that. And so we have to do some internal control to make that happen. So, and I, normally not my position, but I will make sure that it, like I said, it's brought to the right management so we can get it taken care of.
And we will process it administratively, so it's not something that needs, because there's no change in scope or anything, it's putting money back where it was, we'll just do it administratively.
The good news is that, we're just moving on to final design, so that money is really for other stuff. We have enough money for that final design. We're just trying to, since the extra money was added, get all that into the IGA and amend the IGA all at once, and so I appreciate it.
And I have one more small thing that came up. I'm missing transit projects in the tip. I got a phone call from Denver, and so we have nothing in the tip for transit, is what they tell me. So what can we do to rectify that
Can you be
problem?
specific? You mean the faster projects?
I need to have your direct allocation money, at least a pool total in there. I need to have something that depicts anything that you're rolling forward. If there's something that you know that you haven't gotten all the money obligated into a project yet, that Denver's still waiting to something that you worked with Denver directly on. I got a phone call while I was out, and they left a message, and so that I called back, but what they told me is that I can't find anything in the PPACG tip because there are no numbers in there, there's zeros. And so I'm just passing on the message I got out of Denver. So if you have any way of helping us get that information, Brian, it would be greatly appreciated, so that way, at least that's taken care of, okay?
Sure. Yeah, well, I know that next month we'll be having a tip amendment, at least from our side,
Okay.
to get some of the faster
Okay.
projects put in.
All right, awesome.
Allison just contacted me last week, too.
So you may have got the same phone call I got.
And that's the thing that she mentioned. I thought in the past, I thought the either you or somebody at CDOT would start that tip process.
I don't have any way to get that information, though.
And that's what she said.
Yeah.
It'll be up to.
I don't have any way anymore from the way the process works now. It's all direct allocation to Mountain Metro, and we're not, even PPACG's not in that loop. So you're the only way that we get it.
And the FTA money too, if we can just get some of those numbers, cool.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other?
That's all I have.
Any other public comments not on the agenda? All righty. Moving on, we have the minutes from the September 15th, 2016 meeting. Does anybody have any comments or revisions? Have a motion then?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Board of Directors report, October board meeting.
It was, primarily, they approved there wasn't even a tip amendment, was there? I didn't bring my board packet
Yeah,
down.
there was.
Okay, they approved the tip amendment. The other items were information.
Yeah, because the tip amendment was a bunch of those CDOT
Right,
projects.
there's the three CDOT parts,
Yeah.
right.
And it included the one that we did not act on for
Right.
the Rainbow Falls item.
They did approve the critical urban freight corridors. We sent that letter out. We're working with CDOT to get the rural portion of Charter Oak Ranch Road designated. On a related note, not Board of Directors report, what I'm hearing, the project CDOT's going to select with the 2 years of $15 million is operation-type projects, not construction-type projects. So looking at things to make things operate better instead of actual construction.
You're talking about the freight projects?
Yeah.
That's not what I heard before I got here.
Oh, see, I got this yesterday, so.
So this happened this afternoon, so
Oh,
that
well,
that
there
hasn't
you
been
go.
fully decided at this point.
There
So
you go.
It just depends,
We have a shot still?
yes. Honest to God, you still do.
Cool. I think that was it. We were squeezed at the end. The board meeting ran long, and so I had 2 minutes or less to talk about the plan schedule, and everything after about item 7 was greatly cut in length, so.
I'd just like to pass on a comment. It seemed like if you could take this back to whoever, Rob or Policy and Communications, but the way the agenda was this month at least, the action items were up front. So the
It's the
action
second month
items
in a
were
row it's
acted
been that
on
way.
before the committees could give their reports.
Yep.
And, I understand that you want to keep your quorum before everybody leaves before the action items, but it just seemed to be not organized in the best way. And if the committee reports are irrelevant, then, or if they're not going to be given directly, at least just
Yeah, make-
have them as a consent item. Just put them in the packet, and, if the military installations want to report out on their goings-on, that's great, but at least we won't have 15 committee reports to go through, because, that's actually, an hour and a half or sometimes 2 hours of the board meeting is to hear all the committee reports.
Yeah,
It just seems like it could go a little bit better.
Yeah, the CAC expressed a similar sentiment at their last meeting too, so.
And what's the point of having it after the fact, after they've already approved something or disapproved it, when they're not listening to what anybody might have to weigh in on an item? So,
Well, in
Kinda
this case,
backward.
there were a couple items, and I had to get up during those items and have that discussion,
Yeah.
which in some cases may actually be a better thing to do, rather than, because sometimes, they don't understand all the background on some of the issue before, and, from a TAC or CAC perspective, we get up and talk about it before they even hear the item and understand what it is. In some ways, I'd rather, if I need to, get up and, I don't know the best thing, but need to get up. It's almost better to get up during the item.
Yeah, yeah.
It's more relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, so if anybody asked me for my recommendation, I would say keep the military installations as a report, keep CDOT's report, because that's pretty relevant. There's a lot going on in the region with big projects. So, keep those two items in the committee report or information section, but just stuff all the committee reports in there, as something to educate themselves on what the action items are.
And one thing we did when we started having the folks give the report, we condensed those minutes, those meeting minutes, into one-line items versus having the detail. And if you're going to do that and not have the people give the actual report, then maybe we need to put a little more detail back into the minutes as they're written, because then there's no benefit if there's not enough detail in there, especially on specific items. And that might be a detriment to the process as well. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah. And when a meeting takes 3 hours to get through all the business, and then you have information items on the long-range plan or something like that, and
And
that
the
has to
important
be
stuff is
skipped over,
missed.
that's
Yeah.
not good, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? So, item number 6, to policy number 1, tip projects for the long-range plan. This is a review and recommend item. Kevin?
Good afternoon, everyone. Kevin Reyes, Transportation Planner here at PPACG. So the past 2 TAC meetings, I presented 2 potential policies for the 2019-2024 Transportation Improvement Program. We had a pretty lengthy discussion both meetings. Got a lot of good feedback from both the TAC and the CAC on those items. I don't think we need much more discussion on them, so I was hoping to bring those as a recommendation item this month. And I think it's best to have separate motions for each policy. So in the agenda, you'll see them both as separate items. So I'll first go over policy number 1, which we discussed, which says that projects that go into the 2019 to 2024 TIP come from the 2040 Long Range Transportation Plan. Just as a quick refresher on what I discussed for this policy, I outlined the pros and the cons for this policy. Some of the pros to highlight were that having this policy would ensure that PPACG is conforming to the FHWA's performance-based measures, which are now a requirement in the FAST Act. The second pro would be that having this policy would save time both for PPACG and the project sponsors. It saves us time because we only have to score projects once. It saves the project sponsors time because they only have to have one project submission cycle. The third pro for this policy would be that it increases transparency with the public because it shows consistency between the Long Range Transportation Plan and the TIP. And one other pro to highlight would be that this policy would ensure that projects reflect the regional needs as shown in the Long Range Transportation Plan. We did have a couple of cons that we discussed at length. Several TAC members were concerned that having a policy like this would limit the flexibility for this funding, specifically regarding emergencies and a change in priorities. And again, we had a long discussion on this, and I attempted to address it by talking about how this lack of flexibility is a more perceived lack of flexibility because this money is inherently not designed to be flexible. I gave the example of if a major corridor in our region was to be washed out tomorrow, we would want to try to get that fixed as soon as possible. And if we use funding from the TIP to pay for that, we would have to wait 2 years until the next call for projects to even get that in the TIP, and then it wouldn't get funded until at least 2020. So we would be waiting 4 years to get that project even started. So that was a quick example of what I showed with regards to that. Again, so the concern about lack of flexibility is perceived because this money is inherently designed to not be flexible. It's designed for planning projects, which is why staff at PPACG spends 3.5 years writing a robust, comprehensive plan. So yeah, that's the first policy. With that, quick refresher, I'll open it up for any further discussion you guys want to have. Otherwise, I would ask TAC for a recommendation on this item.
Well, I'll open it up for discussion. Aaron.
For the emergency clause, you say you can't you have a separate line that says for certain emergencies or something you can do that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I forgot to mention we can't. Are you talking about the waiver? Or from the
right
board?
here under cons, perceived lack of flexibility for emergencies or rapidly changing conditions. I mean, if like are you talking about ER money or something? I guess a little clarification on why you can't do that would help.
I'm just getting at that this money just takes a long time to get into the TIP. Craig, do you want to answer?
It's not ER money, it's the Metro, CMAQ, and TAP money. ER money would go in, as...
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're using emergencies not as emergency funding, but as like an emergency.
Project.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. ER money would...
Okay.
Yeah.
Like for instance,
ER
the
money is
culvert
an
that was
administrative
washed out in
amendment to the TIP
Metro
today.
Chestnut. If we needed to fund that with Metro money, then that's what they're talking about. Something that's local, it's off the system.
Okay. Thank you.
Any discussion?
I'd just like to say, and I'm trying to straddle both sides of the fence. I understand the need for flexibility, but I think when we do our planning and we write our project applications, we have a lot of thought goes into what we would like to have funded. So I think having consistency between the projects that are in the RTP and what goes into the TIP is a good thing. And I think when there's such a long public process and a transparent public process, when we get to adopting projects that go into the plan, and then we have different projects that are requested to be put in the TIP, it kind of, I think the public can somewhat say, you know, I put some time into this, and I thought I understood the process, but then at the last minute, there are different projects going into the TIP, and I think there's kind of a threat of harming some of what the public perceives as what goes on here, and could result in a lack of participation. So I would like to continue with this, and I think for those emergency situations or where there's changing needs, changing priorities, I mean, that's already happened many times before. There's a process the waiver process, I guess, that can be done to have situations like that taken care of. So I would like to see us go forward, or at least I'll be supporting the consistency between the plan and projects in the TIP.
Tim?
Excuse me, a quick question. When the power's widening between Airport and Fountain, that didn't require a long-range plan amendment, right? Even though we use metros, or did we?
It didn't, because we had it funded with
Other types of
other
monies.
types of funds already included in the plan.
Okay, that's what I thought. Did we have to reduce the monies from that category?
I don't remember. It just went back because it came out of a CDOT RPP pool, or
Okay.
strategic projects pool, and we just.
Part of it came from CDOT, part of it came from your Metro program.
Right, I remember the metro came from our Uinta Street project,
Yeah.
so.
I thought
Also,
we had to do a long-range transportation amendment for that, because there was a whole discussion for a long time, for years, between Kathleen and Craig to get it done. So there was a long-range transportation plan amendment to get that into the TIP.
I'm trying to think what the deal was with that now.
I don't remember that. That's what I was
But
asking.
I tend to think that Jennifer's right, that we did some type of a,
There was a huge back and
Yeah.
forth for.
we had just finished the plan, and it wasn't something that we had as a priority, and we had to make an amendment to do
Yep.
that, yeah.
We had to make an amendment for several
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah. So, which is why you have the amendment process.
Okay.
Because when there's something compelling, you can go through a process to amend the plan. But it shouldn't be the default
Right.
tip selection.
I just couldn't remember, and that one for some reason, that one was kind of,
Yeah.
couldn't remember that
I
one.
think that's one of the last ones we made.
I don't remember.
Well, I think,
In addition to the ones, in addition to the ones we had just recently that
Right.
were applications for
Right.
projects that were
Right.
not included.
Like, was Oak Creek also an amendment? Charter Oaks, or whatever that is?
Charter Oak was in there already. It was projects that we all had, there were projects from the county and the city that were submitted for the last
Okay.
round of funding, and there was amendments then.
Also keep in mind with those projects, as we went through and we did the review, remember, if there were several projects that had fatal flaws in them, the bridge widening, and Craig and I were talking about this yesterday, so remember that part of that had to do with the fact that we found some problems with the projects, that they couldn't go forward as they were written, so that was part of the reason why some of those were swapped for something else.
Okay. Then my other question is, I would have looked this up, but I ran out of time. The smaller projects, we're looking at the small project category in Metro. Are there a lot of small projects in the long-range plan, or do you expect those to come from a category where there won't be an amendment?
Well, Kevin looked at what we have as far as small projects in the plan.
You're talking about the small project category?
Yeah.
Yes. What was your question? One more time.
So would those are those identified specifically in the 2040 plan, or would those require an amendment?
For small projects?
Small projects that are
Are there any small projects funded
Like-
in the current plan?
500,000 or less, or whatever.
In the tip right now, or in the long-range transfer?
In the long-range plan.
Like in the fiscally constrained list? Yeah, so what's small for you? Would that be under 300,000?
That'd be like on the next tip item is like small projects under 500 or whatever, the 3%.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if if somebody came up with a project, would that then have to go through a long-range plan amendment?
Well, and it would also depend on small projects, what the type is. If it's a planning study, no, it doesn't have to be a plan amendment.
Okay,
Sidewalks, those kind of things do not need a plan amendment.
okay.
They don't have to be incorporated. So,
All right, so there's some categories that are flexible in there.
Why would
Okay.
sidewalks not need to be if they weren't in there already?
sidewalks don't have to be named as projects in a plan. It's
Kind of like a TAP-eligible project, right?
exactly.
Well, we actually, on our Glen Eagle sidewalk, when we got money for that several years ago, we actually had to do an amendment to the plan.
Well, no, that was Commissioner Williams wanted it amended into the plan for some reason other than requirement.
I don't remember it that way. But okay.
Sidewalks don't have to be included. It's like ADA, you don't have to do, it's just a non-requirement.
So, I mean, I generally support this, the staff's recommendation. I'm just want to make sure that, we have these little instances where we need that flexibility, and that goes along with the cons that's been identified. But, if we seem to work through them generally, so just wanted to understand it a little bit better.
Anybody else?
No?
Victoria?
Well, I will not be supporting this. I don't think that it is required by law. I think it does limit our flexibility beyond perception. We used to have a separate selection process for TIP projects where we could take into account things that were going on right now, and we came up with criteria for TIP selection that was separate than just the long-range plan. So now we're putting items in the plan, and then assuming that those are the ones that need to be selected for implementation based on the scoring in the plan. So in essence, we're saying that the plan is the gospel and it is always right, and it doesn't give us any of that other opportunity to have those other selection factors that we used to do, which made it function better. So now if we do this, we are literally saying this plan is absolutely right. And we all know, as a planner, my plans are not always right. Things happen, and it will also limit our collaboration and our flexibility in working together and figure out what is right for the region right now.
But you can make long-range plan amendments. I mean, yes, we're saying that we're following long-range plan, but if you have a project that needs to be, that's elevating up, that's not on there, I mean, you can always amend the long-range plan. Of course, you're going to impact one of your projects that's in there.
This is saying we
It's
can't
just a
even submit
timing
a
thing.
TIP project
Yeah.
that's
It's
not in the long-range plan.
That's funded. So we have a single chance to get things scored and funded, and that is the priority that will be forever, because we don't have now the separate TIP selection process that we used to come up with different goals and criteria for selecting TIP projects that was separate from the long-range plan. And that's how we got planning projects done, and that's how we had those bridge funds set aside, because we had separate criteria. We are now losing all of that and saying, not only are we not going to have the TIP selection process that we determine every 3 or 4 years, but we're holding this as the be-all, end-all for not just fiscal constraint of plan, but also for TIP selection.
As far as I can remember, it's always been a requirement that it's in long-range plan by federal guidelines.
It needs to be consistent.
No, it has to be in a fiscally constrained
That's
long-range
why.
plan.
No, it needs to be consistent.
It needs to be consistent.
Greg?
It would only be the be-all, end-all if we were only selecting in 2017 for year 2018, but we're not. We're selecting for the years 5 and 6, and there's an entire plan process that will go in before those projects, those other year projects. So if there is a compelling reason, a compelling project to adjust the plan, there is an opportunity to adjust the entire plan. In addition to the yearly plan amendments, there will be an entire plan update every 4 years. We're selecting in years 5 and 6. So if there is a compelling project, those projects will come into the process.
Hopefully, and hopefully score well enough, and hopefully get in there.
Well, if their regional priorities, regional process, are, that actually serve a regional federal, meet the federal performance requirements and serve that regional purpose, those projects will come in to the process at that level.
Assuming the plan is always right, and I don't assume the plan is always right. In fact, we talked last month about maybe this planning process isn't submitting what our real regional priorities are. And if that is in all true, we are once again tying our hands with this project.
Yeah, and that depends on the local entities submitting the right projects. If the local entities aren't submitting the projects that meet the regions, then you're right, the process isn't going to work.
Okay. I still am not supporting this.
Well,
I don't agree with you, but I'm not supporting it regardless.
a couple things I just want to mention, and I won't be supporting this either. Our scoring always was adjusted for each project, and when we scored the projects, as an entity, as a local government, each of us knew that if we were bringing to a project that wasn't on the plan, that it would be adjusted in some of the scoring. So I think that that allows the flexibility, but also allows those projects that are in the plan to be scored higher versus those. So as a local entity, you took your you understood that project, even though it's not in the long-range plan, would probably be scored lower as a result. So I think that addresses part of the issue. Second, a good example is that, and a big project that I think is high on everybody's priority here, is I-25 North. If we wanted to set some money aside for that project, or do something for that project, it's not in the long-range plan right now. And so that's a great example of a project that, from my perspective, is very important to this community, is not in the fiscally constrained long-range plan, and is pretty important. Second,
So it is technically in the plan.
The third thing is that I'm trying to say this correctly. I just lost it. Anyway, a fourth thing, and I'll try to remember what my third thing was, is when we set policies, usually that's because there's a problem. And I guess from my perspective, I'm not sure that we've really defined what the problem is, and maybe there's a perceived problem.
Well, I
But-
could.
Can I finish talking? I guess I'm a little unclear why all of a sudden we're talking about, this policy change. We do want to stay as consistent with the long-range plan as possible. So now I remember my third thing, by the way. I forgot it again.
You need to hire your replacement so you can reduce your workload.
No, it's just...
Not her replacement, her assistant.
Or her assistant, yes.
Anyway, if I remember it, I'll let you know, but go ahead.
Well, I guess the problem is that 6 months after we adopted the long-range plan, 19 out of the 23 projects that were submitted for funding were not in the plan, and we replaced projects that scored 300 points in the long-range plan with projects that scored 50 points. So it's pretty easy to argue that those projects were not consistent with the plan because they did not achieve the same things as the plan projects. So that would be the problem.
I guess I don't agree with you. I guess I go back to my point of, are the right projects in the plan? That's not saying that the planning process wasn't good. And this, now I've remembered my third thing. is that there's a huge amount of cleared projects through the environmental assessments in the fiscally long-range plan. So what that does, because of that, it really limits how many projects our local governments could put in. So in many cases, we're putting in some of our large projects because, you know, some of those are some of our bigger needs. And so from my perspective, that because of that, and that's not a bad thing, I think that's a good thing because we have projects from a CDOT level that are fiscally, you know, that are needed, but by taking up a huge part of that fiscally constrained portion of the money, it really limits the amount of local projects that we can put in. So from that perspective, I think that we need to provide the greatest flexibility to the plan and the projects to be able to fund the projects that we think as a local community are the best ones. And if they're not in the plan, they get scored, and if they don't meet the criteria and don't meet the needs of the community and aren't, then they won't be funded. I mean, I guess that's, from my perspective, that's where the rubber meets the road as far as the funding. And so that's why I won't be supporting. Craig?
I-25 North, we did include the NEPA, funding for the NEPA document in the plan. We can't include the project for two reasons. First, it's primarily outside our area. Only 2 of the 34 miles is in our region. And second, you can't, you have to have a logical project, so we'd have to include the whole thing. That's actually why they're not doing the EIS. They're doing the Planning Environmental Linkages Study, because Dr. Cog cannot include the whole funding in their fiscally constrained plan to even do the NEPA. You can't do NEPA if you don't show the whole project funded in your long-range plan. So they can't do NEPA without a plan amendment for I-25 North. And, you know, so that project is, you know, we did what we could on it.
I'm just using that as an example. I mean, that's, from my perspective, a good example. I mean, also the Powers Airport, also Cimarron I-25, that wasn't in our plan either. And that's something, you know, those aren't local projects, but those are good examples of great projects that we've done and gotten done and had to amend the plan, and they weren't in the plan.
Right.
And
Yeah, because we
I
lacked.
can't imagine us not wanting to get those done.
And that's why they're still, you know, when there's compelling projects to do, that's what the process to amend the plan is for. It should not be the default. Any project can be submitted in the TIP. The other thing to remember is the Metro funds, TAP funds, are not local projects. They are from Congress to achieve a national goal. And they specified what those goals are in congestion, safety, project maintenance. They're not for our local projects.
Local as a sponsor.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Thank you.
There is an amendment process for the long-range plan for a reason, and I don't see why we should tie our hands to not using it with a policy. Call the vote.
Any further discussion? Any discussion from the audience? Brian?
I'd like to recommend approval of the fiscal year 2019 to 2024 TIP policy that states that projects submitted for the 2019 to 2024 TIP must come from the fiscally constrained project list and the 2040 regional transportation plan.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Is that 2 ayes? Please.
Yeah, you and,
I can't vote.
you actually, okay, you can abstain.
I'm going to have to abstain because it's your process.
Because you have a second, can ask questions?
So,
Well,
Did you
we're
have
in
a
the middle of
second?
a vote.
Or is the second just,
There was a first and a second.
you have a first and a second, can we discuss the motion now? On that?
Okay.
'Cause I'm kind of.
Well, I asked for
being
discussion, but,
on the
okay.
lake. It's kind of hard.
I'll allow
for me
you the
to
leeway.
grasp the concept of where Palmer Lake sits in all this. Because we only have one plan, or one project. Whether we get another project or not, we have to save 5 years to get $50,000 so we can match something. How does that fall into it? We're only in the small projects, we're not in the long-range plan. But if, by the grace of God, something came up that we could go over $500,000, we couldn't do anything then, correct?
just
I'm not, if for some reason, the town of Palmer Lake managed to get enough money to pay our share to do a project that's over $500,000,
Right.
we would be in this number one policy.
Well, would that money appear suddenly, or would you have a year or two notice that it was coming to do, or 3 years, get in a long-range plan? I mean, is it,
But
Is there
but you're
something
ti-
that-
But you're tying it up.
right?
You're making a long-range plan concrete. You can't get in.
Except, well, you can amend the plan anytime, but every 4 years, we update it. That's what I'm saying. So every 4 years, we go through a process to update the plan. We adopted
So
the
if we
plan
have a call for
in,
projects today and you're not in the long-range plan, which if your project is not in there, then no, you can't apply
Right.
per the policy
until the next plan update,
until the next plan update.
which we're starting now. Well, so, and that's what happened, is we had the plan got adopted in January, we called for projects in June, and the vast majority of projects weren't included in the plan that we just adopted a couple of months earlier.
So I'd have to wait 4 years before I could get into this. But before, we were doing that every 2 years.
Except then we're calling for projects that are in the fifth and sixth year, so there will be at least one plan, there'll be
Or
a
there
full
may be
plan.
additional money that comes. You never know, Craig. I mean, we have additional money come in all the time and leave all the time, so we
Well,
we don't
additional,
know.
you mean like a sudden new source, like the 228 money? Then that would pretty much
We
require.
do-
No, sometimes we have a budget adjustment because somebody didn't spend some money and they said, okay, what are we gonna do with it? Let's
CDOT's
throw it in the
revenues
roads.
are estimated for our tips, so they change all the time, correct, Wendy?
Correct.
Thank you.
But they don't change dramatically, very dramatically from the plan numbers.
I don't know, Craig. I mean, we've had $1 million come in and then have to figure out how to spend it.
We just had $1.5 million that we thought was new and it wasn't. So we thought we had money, we spent it, and it turns out we didn't. So,
But we do have reconciliation that happens, and sometimes it does
And-
add up to a substantial amount that we,
and
Program.
and what we generally do with that is, because projects are going over, we take projects from the future, move it close, and leave that extra money in the out years so that we fund the projects, because it's assumed that the projects are funded in order of priority.
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I mean, we've had examples in the past 5 years where that's not happened.
But those are exceptions, not the rule. What we're not trying to make the rule based on an exception. We're trying to make the rule based on what is the best
I'm just trying
process for
to
the
be able
region.
to honestly give all the information so people here can make an informed decision, because the bottom line is that money does, you said money doesn't become available. It does become available, and then we make a decision on how to do that. So there could be an instance where money is there, we have a call for projects, and there are people who don't have projects in the long-range transportation plan, Palmer Lake, Fountain doesn't have any, that they couldn't be able to apply for any of that money. So, just so everybody is transparent, I think that that's the appropriate thing to do, so that they have the correct information to be able to make a good decision.
And that's, the process, it's not like the plan is static. Every 4 years, we go through a process to update it. If there is a compelling, enough money fell out of the sky in Palmer Lake that they could fund a project, we could amend the plan at that point. But we wouldn't make it the rule that
We've
they're,
heard the point.
Yeah.
let's say there was no call for projects for TIP, round for TIP funding. But Palmer Lake identified a need in a project that they want to put into the long-range plan. Do they have to wait for the long-range plan update, or can they do a long-range plan amendment?
twice a year. Yeah, Dr. Cog does twice a year, they do
That's not
a
what your
plan
policy
update.
says.
No, if there is a compelling reason, we can update the plan
It
anytime.
doesn't say you can't update the.
Yeah, we're not saying you don't update the
Saying
plan, we're
you
saying you don't call for
but-
projects in the TIP. You don't allow,
That's exactly what it's saying, Craig.
No, it says that-
You're saying you cannot
This is a
submit a
tip, but not a
project.
long-
for TIP funding, but it's not saying you
TIP
can't amend the
funding.
plan.
But typically, in that case, what we do is we apply for the funds and then we amend the plan.
Well, now, see-
Your policy shows that you can't do that.
Well, you can always amend the plan. Anybody in every month, you can bring,
Policy is intended to limit amendments to the plan.
no, it's intended to make sure that the projects come out of the
That's
plan.
stated.
It's intended to make sure that the projects that are submitted for regular fifth and sixth year funding come out of the plan that is updated every 4 years. If there's a reason to amend the plan, we can amend the plan anytime. Like I said,
But
Dr.
you're
Cog does it
saying-
twice a year.
But you're saying to apply for that project, it has to be in the long-range plan.
Right.
Correct. So,
But you can amend the long-range plan whenever.
But you can't apply for it, though.
You can apply to,
Point to amend
you,
the plan.
because you have a compelling reason. If you have a project that is compelling, you will want to amend it into the plan.
We couldn't do it because we can't apply for the TIP funding to do that.
They're completely unrelated.
Yeah, I'm not catching.
The plan and the TIP are not one document.
This policy doesn't apply to the long-range plan.
Because the plan has to,
No, what I'm saying is you can't apply for the TIP funding if it's not in the long-range plan. And so the point of having the TIP amend, or the long-range plan amended is so that when you apply for the TIP funding, you get it. It's not in the plan, so you amend the plan.
But-
It makes it pointless.
if it's an important project, you'll amend the plan. All this will require is, we found this project that we really need to apply for TIP money. Let's amend the plan.
so
And you can do it twice a year.
Exactly the process that we have currently without the policy.
Except that what happened in reality is the majority, we're not doing.
One time, people submitted TIP projects and you didn't like it, and they scored well and got in, and now it's
They
suddenly a
didn't
problem.
score well. They scored in the 50s. The projects we took out scored in the 300s.
If we don't have enough money to do one of those higher level projects, you're going to submit something where, as a local entity, you're going to submit a project that you can afford to pay. It may not be the top project that we have on that long-range plan, because we may not be able to afford that whole thing right now.
Boy Scout has a question.
please come up to the podium. No, you have to. No, you have to.
So if you want to, if we don't have the money for the projects that we need most, can't we just put them in the long-range plan so they're funded more for, and then so we can put them in later on because we'll need them more later on.
Yeah, that's what the process is supposed to do, is when we don't have the money, we put them for the projects we need in the long-range plan.
Good idea.
Aaron.
Clarifying question. So, after reading this narrative here in this memo, is this the main objective of this to get to a place where the projects in the TIP are ensuring that the performance targets are being met in accordance with the FAST requirements?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, if that's the goal, then I think maybe conversation starts there with that and then moves on. If, just my opinion, I feel like you guys have taken the next step without appreciating that fact that there are these new regulations and laws that are saying the projects in the TIP have to show, the implemented projects show progress towards achieving the goals and performance targets, the national performance targets, in the long-range plan.
Yes, but they don't have to be the highest ones reaching those targets. They just have to go towards them.
True.
So that's part of the reason why I won't be supporting this.
So Bob and Dan have not, are the two votes who have not voted.
Well, Victoria and I haven't either, so.
yeah, I guess.
We were having discussion. Is everybody finished with discussion at this point?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll wait for Victoria's.
No, go ahead. I
Okay.
can vote.
So all those in favor, and please raise your hand because, okay.
Aye.
I will vote aye.
Any opposed? Vote is 4-2. Motion passes. Thank you.
See if I give up South Academy projects again.
TIP policy 2, separate pot for small projects. Review and recommend.
Okay, so yeah, this is the second policy that I brought to the TAC the past 2 months here. And so it sounds like we got a lot of positive feedback from both the TAC and the CAC on this policy, so it sounds like this is something that we actually want to do. And so the thing that we need to decide on is basically how to define a small project. And the first thing that we discussed last month with the TAC and the CAC was if we want to use a hard number or if we want to use a percentage And it sounds like, based on what I've heard, we want to go the route of a percentage, because that allows you to adjust for various factors like inflation. And so I'm proposing that we define a small project as 3% of the STP Metro budget, and we allocate 6% of the STP Metro budget every call for projects. So what that would allow us to do is basically we would we would be able to fund at least one small project every year, and then we would have 2 small projects every call for projects, because we have call for projects every 2 years. So if you look in the second page of your memo, I made a little table there, and it kind of gives you a kind of a ballpark idea of what to expect with this percentage at 3% for defining a small project. So in fiscal year 2020, right now in the TIP, we have just over $8 million. And so what that would do, if we define a small project at 3%, it would give us $240,599 federal money for that project. That's kind of the high end. The low end, in 2017 right now, we have $7,500,000, and so that would give us $225,000 federal money for a small project. So that's kind of there's a difference of just over $18,000 between the two years there. So those are kind of the two extremes that I've seen so far in the TIP for this. So the idea would be defining a small project at 3%, and then once you figure out how much of the budget that project is going to take for that year, then it turns into a hard number, and then that's the actual amount that you're going to be funding that project. Hopefully that makes sense. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've gathered from both committees, that the kind of route we want to go. Yeah, that's it. Any further discussion on that item?
Just
Brian?
one question. I know we had talked about, planning studies being eligible for this.
Yeah.
I mean, is that still the
Yeah, that's a good question. So I forgot to mention that. So that we can definitely decide on that here. I brought that to the CAC, and they did not like that idea. They want to keep this limited only to the full scope of work for a project. But that, yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Craig?
But the TAC can definitely make a recommendation how you would like it.
Jim?
Why did the CAC not like planning studies?
They just felt that this should just, they're just really focused on making sure this was funding a full scope of work, and they just, I don't know, they just didn't like the idea that you could do a part. What's that?
They don't like studies.
I don't know about that. I think they just like the idea of just having this set aside for a full scope of work for a project, and not doing just portions of it. That was kind of what they were saying.
Not really understanding that you can't really do much with $200,000.
But Kevin, just to be clear, this policy doesn't specify, other than small projects, and the definition of small projects being a certain percentage.
Mm-hmm. What's your question?
My point is that it doesn't say what type of project at all. It just says, correct? It just says it's provide a pot of money for small projects. So it could be a safety project, it could be a planning, I mean, as written, the proposed policy, could be any type of project.
It'd be a sound wall.
Correct.
Okay.
But it sounded right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should probably change the language on that one.
Well, no, I guess.
The language is it can be anything, that
I
is
like it
within
that
that
way.
dollar.
You like it this way? Okay, so you,
I guess that's my point. I just wanted to be clear so everybody
Oh, I see.
understood the intent. I mean, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a 10-word sentence. So, I mean, the policy says provide separate pot of money for small projects.
Mhm.
So it could be any type of project as written, as proposed in the staff report. Brian?
And the motion, I guess, should say that we agree with the 3% per year, right? I mean, the motion should be that specific?
I would say so. That's because we want to try to define what makes it, what is a small project. So.
And Bob and Dan, I mean, I mean, we had talked about like a $300,000 cap or a $500,000 cap. This is smaller. Does that suit you guys? I mean, you said that you have trouble coming up with
The match money is our big
$50,000
deal. I
for
mean,
match, yeah.
yeah, I'd say for 7 years to get, for the Douglas project.
So this is a good,
This is a good, but I think on the motion, to be specific, would you also, because it says any, so it's perfectly clear for future generations that we say planning is included. Because it says anything. But so that everyone knows that we talked about planning also. So they don't say, well, they didn't think about planning.
but by not being specific, it opens it up for everything. I mean,
Okay, well.
there's kind of a benefit to leaving it vague.
Okay, all right.
So,
Wendy?
And instead of putting in the motion a hard 3%, how about up to 3%? So that way, when we talked about last month about having 1 year where you might have more projects or less projects in 1 year, so that way you can go up to that 3%, and that way you have some flexibility between the years. So you put 3% in that pool in each year, and you don't have projects to fund them, then the money sits. If you're
Yeah.
allocating it. So how about up to 3%?
Okay. And also, if the money is not fully used, it would just go into the general pool, but I'll definitely make that change as well.
Tim?
Well, I'll make the motion if we're done.
But I just want to make one clarifying question. So it sounds like you guys like the language which allows you more flexibility, and this would allow you to do different project phases and not the full scope of work. Is that correct? Just so I can understand for the next CAC meeting.
Yes, and as long as projects include studies and planning and studies, yes.
Okay, but what you're saying is you would define a small project as one that doesn't do a full scope. It could just be a planning study. Is that what's?
I think what Kevin's asking is, so like, would doing the design of a big project count as a small project? And that's one of the things the CAC did not want, was we're going to fund the design of a $5 million project with $500,000.
Is that what you like about the language of this?
CAC was for whatever reason, that specific, not liking it.
I didn't think we could do that because you actually have to show that you physically need it, so I don't think that's even allowed.
Yeah,
I mean,
Oh, okay.
I mean, the other part of that is that, we could do the design internally or pay for it internally and only ask for construction funding, and then you're caught in the whole, you're only funding one portion. Well, but you're actually getting a lot done, and a local entity has pretty much provided open match for that. So
Right.
I don't think, I don't think we can really fund design because you actually have to show something for your project without having plans or future funding for construction. So I don't think that's even necessary to be addressed, in my opinion. But
I mean, when we think of planning studies, I mean, we think of corridor studies or onboard survey studies in the transit system or whatever. I don't, but I don't know. I mean,
and that's a full
doing it-
scope of work.
Yes.
I mean, it's not like so you have to study. It just may not end up in construction.
Should I make a motion?
Well, I guess, I remember us talking about, they have a percentage here, but I thought we had talked about maybe up to like 500,000 and trying not to, so, I mean, I just remember that from last time, and I'm not opposed to either way, but I just want to remind everybody, when we talked about a small project, I think there was some discussion that typically under 250,000, most people don't want to do that project anyway with federal funds because of all the NEPA jump-throughs that you have to go through that usually cost at least $50,000 right off the bat. So I just had remembered us looking at 500,000 possibility. And I think that goes back to Wendy's discussion about combining a couple years. So I'll just throw that out there before you make the motion.
Because this would cap it at, so let's say, take 2017, for example, the federal funds would be capped at 225. could always do more local match, but it's 3%. Are you suggesting maybe we look at the percentage being a little bit higher?
I don't know. I mean, I think we need to define a small project, but to me, a small project, you know, you want a lot of flexibility, and you don't want somebody just to have to do something for $271,000 because that's what all you have. And, you know, maybe a really good small project that, you know, maybe somebody comes through with, it's $350,000. So then you're stuck because now we've defined the small project as that 3%, so.
I like the up to 100,000 or something. That nature as opposed to the 3%.
Anyway, I mean, I just want is if somebody's, whether it's the county or the city or even some of the smaller communities, if they're coming forth with a small project, that's a good one, you know. I just hate for it just to be.
I would just, let's say we get a year of reduced metro monies or something like that, and then a larger portion goes to the small projects. I kind of like the percentage myself. Or if we get even an abundance of money, then more could go towards small projects. I suggest.
I think approximately 3% is probably a good rule of thumb, but I guess I would like us to be able to, as we're submitting projects, is to you know, if you remember when we added the bridges that one year, we had an approximate amount that we wanted to provide to the bridges, and I think we went over that, but was able to fund 3 bridges, and kind of everybody was okay with that. I mean, Wendy, help me if I'm remembering wrong, but I mean, I just we gave ourselves some leeway in there, and I'm not sure how we worded it, but we did allow for ourselves to provide some leeway. And I guess I just would hate just to say 3% is the only percentage. That's all.
Would this committee be, well, where did the 3% come from?
It was sort of a ballpark from, I compared it to CDOT's Safe Routes to School. They didn't use a percentage, they used a hard number. They used 350,000 as a maximum. And so this was more or less kind of close to that, but I didn't want to go too high. One of the concerns that we got from the CAC members from some of the smaller communities was that they wouldn't have the local match if we were to have a really high cap. So that was some of the stuff that they mentioned last month.
But I mean, if we say up to 5%, they can do anything lower than 5% would be okay.
Yeah, they could also do that as well.
So,
but I did see in the fiscally constrained list of projects in the long-range transportation plan, there was quite a few projects. I can't remember the number, but they were under 300,000 that were in there. So,
would you feel comfortable with 5%? Okay. All right. You concur? Okay. All right. So, can I make a motion?
Sure, you can anytime.
I propose the FY 2019 to 2024 TIP policy be that we provide a separate pot of money for small projects capped at 5% of Metro funds per year.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Victoria?
I will not be supporting this. Since our last policy basically said that the long-range plan and progress towards the target goals are the be-all, end-all, then this policy is in contradiction to that. So I will not be supporting.
Okay. Motion and a second. Any other further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Item number 8, note policy.
All right, so this is the last policy I have here for everyone. This was brought up, I think, last month's TAC meeting. Some TAC members mentioned this as something that they wanted to have as a discussion item for today. So I just wanted to make that opportunity available for any discussion on this item. I don't have anything to present on it. I just wanted to open up the floor for discussion.
Nope. I have no comments.
I have no comments other than the fact that I don't quite understand why this wasn't included as a review and recommend item either. I mean, we've been discussing all three of these policies for a couple months now, so would be good to have, some action on it.
Because we hadn't had a formal item on it, so the idea is to have it as a discussion this month and then action next month. So.
Okay, I've already given you all my comments on it. So
Would you like to see it as an action item next month, or?
I would.
Okay.
So it's already a policy, right?
It's already a policy, yeah.
So we're
Bring it.
considering changing it or doing away with it or reaffirming it.
So it sounds like, I guess I didn't understand what you wanted last month, at last month's meeting. Can you just state what exactly action item you would want for this policy?
I would think that we would want to consider rescinding the note policy.
Okay.
It's probably the easiest way to do it than changing it.
Craig?
On a, I guess, note related to all three of the previous items, for the next call for projects, would the TAC be more inclined to have a regular standing yearly item to amend the plan, or should we have a call to amend the plan during the development of, like, the application process before the projects are due, so that we can amend the plan if there is a compelling project to come up that would like to be submitted for funding, that we can get the plan amended before the deadline for TIP projects? I mean, should it be like a yearly thing? Do we, every year we have June, we will amend the plan if we need to? Or would it be in association with the call for TIP projects to allow? What?
Victoria?
I would rather consider that, and I don't know what the answer is right now.
Okay.
Consider which one?
That issue.
Okay. Because I kind of like the idea of every January, who's thinking about changing the,
Projects.
who has a project coming out that might need to change.
But we'll bring that back as a discussion, or do you want probably discussion for next month and then, okay.
And if nobody has anything, then less work for everybody.
All righty, any further discussion on that item? Item number 9, long-range transportation plan schedule.
Thank you.
This is, as presented last month for discussion, just make a recommendation to the board that this is the process that we should use to frame out the update of our next regional transportation plan. Using what is now called PlanWorks is what we've used the last 2 plan updates from Federal Highway. It's just Federal Highway changed the name. They didn't like what it was called the previous 2 times. I think they've settled on PlanWorks now. And this will frame out our plan update. And then you can see the rough schedule that takes us from basically January of 2017 is when we will start with the goals through November of 2019, final adoption of the plan, September of 2019, with completion of the draft document.
So is that your deadline date? September?
Yes.
Okay.
So actually, no, our deadline is November. Oh, crap. No, it's November of 2019 is our deadline, because it's 4 years. It was adopted in November of 2015. So, so this lays out the next roughly 3-year process. And we're just looking for a recommendation to the board that this is the process we should use.
Any questions for Craig on that?
I have a comment.
Please.
I think that based on what we have heard, with our statewide folks. They're looking at revising our schedule a little bit and pushing our process out. And if they do that, that might have some bearing on when you get financial numbers. So I think that we need to do some coordination just to make sure that we're not going to have a detrimental issue on your schedule.
Greg?
And we talked about that a bit at the statewide MPO meeting.
Sorry, I missed that.
Oh, yeah. No, the among the issues is everybody, including CDOT, has accepted that we can't just assume that the current funding structure keeps going forward as it is. So we're looking at then, well, what additional funding or funding structure can we look at? CDOT has the road user charge project they're looking at. There's a host of other things that impact how CDOT's revenue model works, because CDOT, basically it takes vehicle miles traveled, average miles per gallon per car, and that figure out how many gallons of gas are sold. You take a percentage of that. That's sort of how CDOT's model works. Problem is there's a lot of hybrid electric vehicles, and by 2050, there's going to be a significant portion of those cars on the road are going to be hybrid electric vehicles. Our current funding structure won't work. So instead of it being a 3 or 4 month revenue projection process, as we've done in the past, it's probably going to be 10 to 12 months and trying to figure out what that is. The good news is the resource allocation is long-range plan step 5, programming 1, so it's realistically 18 months out before we need it, 18 to 20 months. So we think it'll harmoniously come in there. We don't actually have to have the funds until we get to the cut line. It's better to have it earlier, but so that is something that we actually talked about at the last statewide MPO meeting. So yeah, it is an issue.
Victoria?
I'm curious as to why we're voting on a
Because that is the long-range plan step 1 of Federal Highways guide, is that there should be agreement at the start about the process going forward so that you don't get halfway through. Apparently there are other places where they got to a step and said, why are we doing this, or well, we didn't agree to this early or something. So it's literally just LRP1, approve the scope of the RTP in the process. So we're following Federal Highways process.
And so if we change the process as we move forward, we have to vote again?
I think there should be agreement before we change the process, yeah. I think people should agree that what we're doing, that actually gives some reassurance to you all that we're not going to go off on a wild hair. So,
And I'm very uncomfortable voting on this month before we have a better understanding of this new model that we're talking about.
I'm not sure the new model.
Funding model.
The urban sim.
Oh, urban sim model. Okay.
That's the model that we talked about, you bringing something back to us, I think, last month,
Oh, no, it was the travel demand model we talked about last month.
about the urban sim.
All right, see, this is how little I know about urban sim. I thought urban sim was the travel demand model, so I'm very uncomfortable voting on this right now then. Until we have both of those presentations, then if there are 2 or 3 things.
What? Oh, yeah.
And I don't think you're going to have a small area forecast done by next month for a vote.
No, it's the small area forecast. I think we have it kicking off in spring. Let me see where it says on the.
On the schedule here on the first page, it says that it will be voted on the very first page in November of 2016. So that might be a mistake, but.
On agenda item 9, the memo.
No, on the first page of your timeline.
The schedules.
Small area forecast, the vote is in November and December of 2016. You can see it on my on my iPad if you want.
Yeah.
So I was kind of surprised that you can get that done in advance.
Those dark
Yeah, see, the small, I don't know, Jennifer's not here. The small area forecast is a 2017, late 2017 thing. I don't know what.
You want to see?
No, I see it now, and I don't know what happened there. Honestly, because it's supposed to be that time in 2017.
I was going to ask that question too. 'Cause
I was like, did I miss a bunch of meetings?
No, yeah,
it usually takes at least a year to get to.
yeah. We're planning on it being a full year.
Well, it looks like it goes all the way to June of 2017. So I wonder if there was a,
Yeah, except that they have the approval dates.
Yeah, there's something happened with this.
Not right.
Yeah, there's something happened with this file.
The bigger picture is I'm uncomfortable going into the process before I understand it.
Any other discussion? Does somebody have a motion?
Can I move that we table this item until we have a presentation on the travel demand model and urban sim? No second?
What is this in relation, or is it in relation to the other long-range plan? Is this different? Well, on the TIP projects up above, this has nothing to do with that.
Correct.
This is just on the travel plan. This,
This is about methodology and process for updating our next,
yeah,
long-range plan. So, no, it doesn't have anything to do with the other
No.
three votes. We're looking at using new models and some new urban sim thing, and I don't know what they are, and I don't know anything about them, and so I'm hesitant to vote for something I don't understand.
I think it's a reasonable expectation to have a presentation, and then you can make a decision based on that. As long as it doesn't have a major impact on what we're trying to get done here, and I think we're okay at this point, so I don't see that there's any reason why we can't do that.
that's what I was just about to ask. This doesn't, a month's delay won't affect.
Now,
Okay.
January,
Second.
what we'd like to do in January is take the goals, get that goals process started. That's really,
And I don't even have a problem starting that, that part of it. I don't understand these other two things, and if I'm going to vote for the whole process, I don't understand.
So, for the record, I second the motion.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Member entity announcements. Oh, sorry. Travel
well, you asked for it, here's half of it.
model update. And this is an information item.
I'll give it my best shot. Craig asked me to do it a week ago, so.
Welcome.
So this is one component, which is the travel model update.
And this is Maureen.
Last spring, I'm sorry, Maureen Cosdaro with, Wilson and Company. And I'm the project manager for the update. The update is being, from a consultant basis, has PTV, Parsons Brinkerhoff, Cambridge Systematics, and Wilson that are doing it. And PPACG is doing kind of a innovative approach to the model update. We are using the current trip-based model, which was rigorously calibrated pretty effectively in 2013. We're using that as a foundation and building into it features that we're calling a tour-based model. So as I go through the presentation, you'll see what the difference is and why we're doing this. But it fits into some of the discussion that we had before about changing things in terms of travel patterns, things that we need to know that the trip-based model can't tell us. So, arrows. Nothing's happening. Let's try the mouse. Oh. Just slow. Okay. So what is an activity-based model? Activity-based models more closely replicate actual travel decisions than trip-based models do. And how they do that? Well, they actually simulate individual persons within a household and how they plan and schedule their daily travel. They have finer grain temporal structure. The model has 1 hour time slices, sometimes half hour. Our trip-based model has 8 time slices. And they represent more realistically the constraints of time and space on individual travel decisions. As I go through, you'll get more of an understanding about that. So the reason that they're better suited to evaluating these emerging and key planning questions. Some examples is because of the individual travel simulation, you can do equity analysis. You can understand the benefits and disbenefits to different populations, like the elderly, the children, students. You can also analyze complex investment strategies. Now, the trip-based model, you can evaluate differences in travel impacts based on congestion, but not by pricing, except as a surrogate. So this will let you do that, because people make decisions whether to take a toll lane, for example. Let's see. So the limitations with the trip-based model, which we have right now, is that they ignore the interdependence of trips. They're simulated as I go from home to work, that's one trip, and when I go home from work to home, that's another trip. There's no linkage. There's no stops in between. There's an aggregational bias because we take a household and we assume that everyone in that household, the households are disaggregated by, say, income category, some attributes, but we assume that everyone in the household has the same travel patterns, which is not true. They're not as sensitive to time of day. Now, we worked hard on this with the PPACG model. We have 8 time slices, so we can see the difference between peak and off-peak and midday and so on. But with trip-based models, to get to 24 hours, your run times would be, the computational would be very high, so it's typically not done. And they're not very sensitive to accessibility. I gave an example. Say you go to work and then you go shopping, and you might make a travel decision to eat out because it's accessible, the restaurant. So, and this update will do it. So this slide just explains the difference between, which I sort of already went over, between a trip and a tour. This is a tour-based model, remember? So there's 3 trips in this tour. The first one is the home to work. Second one is the work to shop. Third one is the shop to home. And that's a that's a 2-stop tour. So we use a household survey to determine all that, the probability of stops and so on and so forth. So the advantages I kind of went over before of the activity-based model, the things that we can do with it. Downside, and what you've seen, you may or may not be aware, full activity-based models have mostly been done by large metropolitan areas, a few states, because they have had a very high development cost, significantly higher, in the millions of dollars to develop them. They have longer run times, and we're talking days versus hours. And they're usually part of a larger set of models, so there's more moving pieces. I believe in Denver they had runs that took weeks because of all the pieces. Staff expertise is required. There's a learning curve. So the staff that's going to run the model versus the consultant that developed need to have some of that expertise. Up to now, there's been a dedicated high-end software where you have multiple processing and also additional software requirements and lots of data, sometimes to the parcel level. Now, these are all a worst case. It's getting better now. Our machines have improved and so on and so forth, but it was a concern. And it's a reason that PPACG didn't go to activity-based models in spite of a lot of pressure at the state level and competition with the MPOs. Some of that's better, but these were our objectives, and what we decided was a hybrid approach, where we have the trip-based model, retain some components, and bring into it all the features that we need to accomplish these things. Particularly the things I talked about, evaluating equity, looking at impacts for accessibility, being able to look at certain populations and their travel behavior, all those things that we can't do with our current model. So there's 3 different approaches that have been taken throughout the country as you implement activity-based models. There's the upfront development, which we saw in Denver and the state's doing now, which is pretty intensive and takes a lot of time. They basically throw away the old model and develop it from scratch. And it can be years to get it up, and in the meantime, there's the issue of maintaining the trip-based model at the same time. And then there can be incremental implementation. Other entities that have done that have just taken pieces that they might use later, like the synthesizer that gets you from the household to the individual people, and they'll get those pieces up, and then essentially they go to the upfront development piece and maintain the 2 models separately. And then there's the transfer and refine, where you take somebody else's model and bring it in and then try to make it fit locally. So we took, like I said, a hybrid approach, and what the model has is the key additional component is the tour generation. So we're not dealing with trips anymore, we're dealing with these tours. And we retained some of the 4-step model elements and adapted them. And we retained some of them as they were, the external models, the group quarters hotel. You'll see as I move forward kind of what we retain. So we're doing this within the software that PPACG's model is. There's a add-on module. And so these are the individual type, the tour types that we have, or the individuals that we're simulating. Employees with car available, without car. So this is different than what you may have seen from the trip-based. Employed with car, employed without car, apprentices, students 18 and older, secondary school students, primary, and children under 6. So in this model, we're going to be capturing that you drop off your child for daycare, all those kind of things.
What's an apprentice?
Not sure.
I didn't know what it was either.
I'm not sure, because another thing we did was to leverage what had been a front range survey. I think that the TAC's aware of that was done jointly, and a lot of it had to do with providing input to the tour-based model for the Denver Regional Council of Governments, and also a statewide model that is going to be tour-based. So we've gotten all that information, that survey, to develop this. And kind of anecdotally, as a side, they looked at income differently, and we had tried to extend the trip-based model. We had 5 income categories to try to get around the downside. I guess I didn't go over that slide, but one of the downsides of the trip-based is that we're homogenizing all this, and if you have more income categories in the households, then there's less effect. So anyways, for the tour modeling approach, we use this add-on and compute the tour generation, which is analogous to trip generation, and the destination choice, which is the distribution, where you determine where people go to from that piece. They're computed together, and then mode choice separately. So this is a lot of detail, but those are all the pieces that we have in the model. The activities, activity pairs, so home to work, demand time series, that's kind of like trip purpose, activity chains, demand strata. So those are those things that we looked at before, and those are some example tours. In this case, the first one is home to work to home, so there's no stop. Home to shop to home, no stop, and then you go down where there's 4, home to work to home. So that might be a second job. And so from the survey, we got all the percentages of the individuals making these trips. The survey has a great deal of details to every individual in the household. And for the distribution of how to determine where those trips originated and ended, we retained the gravity model function for the destination choice. And I'm going to go through some slides that are a lot of math, but we'll get to the stuff that's kind of more summary. And then the mode choice happened after that. So here, I said those two were together, so we're choosing the origin and destination of the trips that are generated, or the tours that are generated. And then after that, picking the mode, and you'll see that based on the survey, some things that are intuitive is an auto would not be exchangeable in a tour when you didn't have an auto to start with. And similarly, you couldn't switch to bike if you drove your car to work, probably. So those are all factored into the computational algorithms. This shows you a time of day. Remember, I told you that it was 24 hours, so you'll see the one on the top is a home to work, home activity to work, so that piece of the trip. And you'll see that that happens when you'd expect to be reporting for work, so it's mostly from 6 to 9 there. This I touched on before. So we have this survey, and it's a sample of households. It's not all the households. So we're using software called PopGen, actually working with the state on this, to generate what's called a synthetic population. So we're going to have a representation of every individual in the region and household they're associated with, 643,837, whereas we had a sample of households. These are just some of the detailed elements, just to give you an idea. I'm not going to go into detail, but you'll see those categories of individuals, non-worker, senior, so on, and then the activity codes, whether it's a home, which is an anchor, a stop on the way that's not school or work, and so on. And then based on what we found in the survey, we determine what the likelihood, and we have factors, parameters, coefficients to determine how likely it is that you make a certain number of stops and what the sequence is. So these are all the kind of tours that we could have. And then the time of day structure, those activity pairs. That goes back to the graph I showed you that work trips, report to work trips are happening in the morning and return in the evening. So you can see this model gives us a lot more detail than we have in the trip-based model. So the status is that we completed the beta model, and it was done using the vSim and a mix of Python scripts within Zoom. So it's like the same version, just like what you see before, except that we've replaced the trip generation, distribution, and mode choice with this. We've retained some elements. I have a lot of details about the model that you're probably not that interested in, but we can provide a copy of it. But I didn't have a lot of notice, so I try to adapt what we were doing with staff technically a couple weeks ago. So there's a tour generation piece, the tour distribution piece, the mode choice piece, and that's actually the screen in the software of the model. So what are the next steps that we're working on is calibration and validation. PTV, which was the main implementer in their software, has turned it over to the other consultants, and we're checking and updating the retained trip-based model components. I mentioned, I guess I didn't list them, but there was a truck model in the group quarters hotel, and those we're updating. We'll have a new base year, which is 2015. And we're adjusting tour rates if we need to based on the overall trips that's produced. Unfortunately, I don't have for you today. We had a plot that showed the volume assignments on the network for the current trip-based model versus what this model produced, and they're a really good fit. That doesn't mean it's calibrated. It just means that we're on track. And then we'll calibrate the attraction equations, and that's kind of the accessibility index of why you would go to that destination, and the distribution and destination choice. and calibrate mode choice. Those are the things we need to do. This is where I was going to have that graph for you. It's like a line graph that shows the two axes, and it all converges pretty much on the line very well. So I know it's a lot, but I think, I guess I would say in conclusion that I think that this is a good path that PPACG and the region has taken to have the functionality in the state-of-the-art models without the overhead. So.
Craig, you were going to say something?
Well, we were really able to do this because the survey, Dr. Cog, and to some degree CDOT is doing an activity-based model. So they actually, they laid the groundwork when they did the survey, and we piled on to their big survey. So we're, it's a phased implementation. We may get to a full activity base at some point. We may not. They are cost prohibitive. Dr. Cog dropped $5 million on theirs. Columbus, Ohio dropped $7 million on theirs. We're going to go for probably $700,000 total cost. So hopefully.
Well, I don't want you to give the impression that what we're doing is that. It's been $100,000 so far.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there's, I guess, continue the, and I'm including Urban Sim in that.
Yes, yeah.
Because they're related. And I learned some lessons. Accidentally opened the population synthesis spreadsheet, thinking I'll just open up 643,000 rows.
Well, I couldn't open it.
Yeah, mine tried, and it locked my computer up. So it's we are taking a definite step up in rigor, or I guess hardware demand. But we're matching what the state is doing with the statewide model. That will prevent disagreements over their model says one thing, our model isn't capable of answering
that's
it.
a good point.
So
I think on the next steps we talked about for the mode choice that we are going to try to coordinate and perhaps adopt coefficients that are consistent with CDOT.
to make sure that ours and Dr. Cog's and CDOT's all work together.
And two things I want to add. One, what you said about the spreadsheet. In the model itself, we're not working in spreadsheet. We're working in database, and so it all works very nicely. But that was for us to be able to open it and kind of look at what would drill into it, and a lot of us could not.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is the runtime. I mentioned that the database models are days to run. This is actually faster. It's partly because of software upgrades in Vizoom. It's partly because of the efficiency of the Python code that PTV has written. But we had a 5-iteration run in an hour and a half.
Versus
And we
about
think it will be
6 hours.
shorter than the trip-based when we get done.
So it right now it runs faster than the old model did.
Yep.
Hey, Maureen, you're basing it on population how does that accommodate for those trips in for the commuters outside of?
That's a good question. That, for the time being, that's one of the models that we retained. So we don't have a tour-based commercial vehicle, the truck thing, and we don't have a tour-based for the external, internal. So what we're doing on the next steps is to make sure those are fine-tuned. Generally, they are, because we all have traffic counts for CDOT, and they all match, So I think you were asked to look at how Dr. Cog's matched with yours. Of course it matches, because we calibrated to the same numbers.
Right.
So.
And one of the things we're looking at is how to improve our external, internal. There are some sources of data. It's just going to be a resource balancing activity. As we have money, we have a limited pie. Is it more important for us to do, the external, internal, or is it more important to do whatever else we're trying to do, an accessibility study or something?
You're talking about the mobile source data?
Right.
Right. And we might look at that also for the hotel, the tourist model that we're keeping from the trip base to get some better data on that. Okay.
Any other questions for Maureen?
Okay, good.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Will you send this out for?
Yep.
Already asked.
And I don't know if you. I don't know if you'd be interested, but there's a really good primer that was put out by a Sharp 2 project that contrasts them and talks about the development of them and, little light reading. Okay, I'll send that to you.
Item number 11, member entity announcements. Victoria.
We have opened our public comment period for the major transportation corridor plan. We are accepting public comments on our draft until November 14th. The earlier the better, though, because I have to have it done by the 16th. I know.
Wow.
Anyone else?
I have one. We have a new policy communications manager from El Paso County. Jessica McMullen will be our new policy communications manager. She starts on Monday. Her first item of business will be hiring her new assistant, and then she'll go to a CAC meeting, which is kind of funny. So we are filling staff.
Craig, can you reach out to the City of Fountain, our members who are assigned as TAC representatives? Dwayne and Dave neither of them are no longer there. So can you reach out and see if they want to name some people?
We have a new city engineer as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Also from El Paso County.
Any other member entity announcements? Items for future TAC meetings.
What's that? Oh, I didn't have anything. Just the note
Okay.
policy.
Items for next TAC meeting. We'll bring back the NOPE for action. We'll bring back for discussion the projects, the plan amendment sort of discussion. I will see if I can get Dr. Coggs, Urban Sim, one of their people to come down and talk Urban Sim, because we don't have the model ourselves, and actually the person we're looking to contract with to help us is Paul Waddell, and he's really not available to come here on that kind of short of notice. We are planning on bringing him out. He's actually the developer of Urban Sim. But Dr. Cog has 3 economists that run Urban Sim for them. We'll see if one of them come down to the next TAC meeting and talk Urban Sim. And then we'll bring back the schedule for the plan. I think that's what I had for next.
So those items should go together, right? I mean, in order to approve the RTP schedule and the methodology, you'll want to see the Urban Sim presentation first, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
But we still would have November and December to do
Okay.
it, so. So we're not meeting in December.
Any other item for TAC before we adjourn? Okay. I'm adjourning because I don't need a motion, so there you go. Have a great week, everybody.
You too.
Or next 3 weeks.
Yes.
Is the meeting done?
Yes, but I have to talk to Maureen afterwards. Here, sit with me.
Actually, I was going to sit back at the seat.
You don't want to sit with me?
I actually want to sit back at the seat. But still, I love you.
Oh, man, I'm bummed.
Okay, I'll sit you with you later. I'll
Okay.
make it up for you.
Sit right here then.
Actually, you sit where I got you.
Okay.
Not just only that, Dad. I think there's a water fountain in the blue building, but since I'm getting closer,
Okay.
should I go find it?
Okay. Yes.
Can you please keep it watching it still?
Yes. Yes.
I was hoping that Ken was going to be here because what I'm going to give you is the computer that Ken ran it on with the thing, and so I need some refresher course on how to do it. So
Well, I don't need it right now.
Well,
Should I
that's
wait?
what I
Should
was
we wait?
thinking. Actually, Tiffany and I are going to do this, so maybe we'll figure it out by ourselves, because Ken's not here to tell us. We're going to do it tomorrow and Saturday.
On research or 30th? Okay.
And so, we could do research while we're at it if you want us to.
If you want to, I don't,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if you have time,
And
if
then,
you're free and you
then what I
go
would
run
do
it.
is just lend the whole thing to you if you want to do it repeatedly, because